The gas shut off while I was boiling water for pasta. 1 second the burner was glowing blue, the next it was dead. I twisted the knob off, then back on. Nothing. I checked the water heater too cold. I knew the bill was paid. So unless the gas company suddenly decided to play Russian roulette with utilities, something was off. I stepped outside and spotted a bright orange tag zip tied to the meter. Service disabled per HOA request. That's when I saw her. Vivica Bramble, the HOA president, standing across the street in her usual pastel cardigan, arms folded and lips pursed like she'd just tasted something sour. She saw me read the tag and didn't even pretend to look away. "You were warned, Brandon," she called out. "Late fee. 38 days past due, you ignored the notice." "I mailed a check 2 weeks ago," I shouted back. "Too little, too late," she snapped. "We have protocols." I wanted to say a lot of things. Instead, I walked back inside, fuming. I dug through my desk drawer until I found it my HOA ledger. There it was, a late fee of $75 from a missed quarterly payment. I had sent the full amount plus the fee. But apparently they never processed it. I wasn't some deadbeat. I was Brandon West, a freelance architect who paid every bill on time. I'd moved into Cedar Ridge Estates 5 years ago because it was quiet, clean, and supposedly community-oriented. That was before Vivica got herself elected president and started treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. I drove straight to the gas company. "Sir, we only act on official HOA requests when they submit legal documentation," the clerk told me. "They claimed you authorized it." "They forged that," I said. "I never signed anything," he nodded. "You're not the first to say that." I left with copies of the forged request and the name of the HOA's utility liaison, a guy named Dennis who lived 3 houses down and always avoided eye contact. Back at home, I installed a security cam above my meter. If they came back, I'd know. Then I called a friend, Vanessa Blake, an attorney I knew from a zoning dispute years back. She was sharp, relentless, and hated HOAs even more than I did. "They shut off your gas," she said, stunned. "That's not just harassment, that's criminal interference with a utility." "You have proof," got the forged form, got the tag, got witnesses. "Good, don't touch anything else. I'll draft a cease and desist and we're filing an injunction first thing Monday. In the meantime, I want you to write down everything Vivica's ever pulled on you." That night, I sat down with a beer and started the list. It was longer than I thought. Fines for my kids by being visible from the street. Threats over my mailbox being non-regulation beige. A warning for excessive garage work when I was building a bookshelf. And now this shutting off essential utilities over a fee I'd already paid. This wasn't about money. It was about power. Vivica's face flashed in my mind again, smug and certain. We'll see how smug she looks in court. Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking not on the front door, but on the siding near the garage. I pulled on a hoodie, grabbed my phone, and stepped out to find Dennis, the HOA's so-called utility liaison, crouched next to the gas meter. His head snapped up when he saw me. "You might want to back away from that," I said, holding up my phone. "You're on camera." He stood up fast, hands raised like he was caught stealing silverware. "I was just doing a check standard inspection." "Funny, that's not what the gas company called it." Dennis looked like he wanted to run. I stepped closer. "You signed off on that forged shutoff request." "Your name's on the form." He hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck. "Vivica said it was all cleared. She handles the paperwork. I just file what she hands me." "So you don't read what you're signing?" His face tightened. "Look, I didn't know it was forged." I didn't say anything else. I just let that hang in the air until he muttered something under his breath and walked off. I texted Vanessa and told her everything. She replied within minutes. "We'll subpoena him." He just admitted he didn't verify the document. That's negligence, and it puts Vivica in a tight corner. By Sunday, I had installed a second camera facing the street. If anyone else from the HOA touched my property, I'd have it in full view. I also printed a large sign for my lawn. Utility tampering is a crime. Cameras recording 24/7 HOA trespassers will be reported. By noon, 3 neighbors had stopped to ask what was going on. Vivica had my gas shut off with a forged form, I said bluntly. Their eyes widened. Seriously? One of them, Mark, asked. How is that even legal? It's not. And I've got a lawyer on it, he leaned in. You know, she tried to fine me last month for trimming my hedge on a Sunday, said it violated quiet hours. I checked the bylaws. There's no rule like that. Another neighbor, Leela, joined in. She told me my flower pots were non-compliant because they didn't match the earth tone palette. I've lived here for 16 years. That woman's inventing rules. I nodded. If you've got documentation, emails, letters, anything, send them my way. Vanessa's building a case. By evening, I had 5 more people come forward with similar stories. Harassment, fabricated violations, threats of liens over unpaid fines that weren't even real. One resident, a retired Navy mechanic named Roy, said Vivica had tried to enter his backyard to inspect debris without notice. He chased her off with a rake. Monday morning, Vanessa and I sat in her office, going over the folder I had compiled. She wore a gray suit and had her hair tied back, flipping through the pages like she was dissecting evidence at a murder trial. She's not just a control freak, she said. This is a pattern of malicious enforcement and abuse of power, and that forged form. That's identity fraud and unauthorized interference with a public utility. We're filing criminal charges, I nodded. Good, I want her out, for good. Oh, she's not just getting booted, she's going to face jail time. We filed the injunction that day. Vanessa also submitted a criminal complaint with the county sheriff's office. By Tuesday, a detective named Harris was assigned to the case. When Harris came by to speak with me, he showed no signs of brushing this off. She forged your signature on a utility authorization, he asked, flipping through the documents. Not just mine. She's done worse to others. I've got statements. Good, we'll need sworn affidavits, and we'll be pulling HOA meeting minutes and financial records. If she's been using her position to push false penalties and collect illegitimate fees, that opens up a whole new set of charges. He took the forged form into evidence and left with a promise to keep me updated. That night, I attended the monthly HOA board meeting. It was held in the community center, a beige box of a building with flickering fluorescent lights and folding chairs set in rows. I wasn't alone. Word had spread. Nearly 40 residents showed up, most of them people Vivica had wronged in some way. She stood at the front of the room in her usual pastel sweater, tapping a clipboard against her hip. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed. We'll now begin tonight's meeting, she said. Let's keep things orderly and no, I said, stepping forward. You don't get to dictate the order anymore. There was a murmur behind me. People shuffled in their seats. Vivica tried to wave me off. Brandon, if you have a concern, you can submit it in writing, I already did, to the sheriff's office. That shut her up. I held up a copy of the forged gas shutoff request. This is a criminal document. You submitted it with my forged signature. You committed identity fraud and tampered with a public utility. There is an open investigation. You're being served with an injunction. Effective immediately, you are suspended from HOA duties. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people clapped. Vivica's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing outside the bounds of my authority. Vanessa stepped up beside me. Try again. We have over a dozen affidavits detailing harassment, unapproved fines, and illegal property entries. You're not just overstepping, you're breaking the law. One of the residents, a woman named Teresa, stood up holding a manila envelope. This is a letter you sent me threatening to place a lien on my house over a trash can being visible for more than 15 minutes. That's not anywhere in the bylaws. I checked. Another man raised his hand. She fined me for having a green hose instead of a beige one. I have the notice. One by one, people began speaking up. It was like a dam had broken. Vivica's face twisted. This is a coordinated attack. A smear campaign. A deputy entered the room. Everyone fell silent. Vivica Bramble, he asked. She stared at him, stunned. You're being placed under arrest for identity fraud and unauthorized tampering with a regulated utility. You have the right to remain silent. The room was dead quiet as he cuffed her and walked her out. No one said a word until the door closed behind them. Then Roy stood up and said, "Well, who's bringing snacks to the next meeting?" Laughter broke out. It wasn't loud or mocking, just relief. The spell had been broken. By Thursday, the board held an emergency vote to dissolve Vivica's presidency. The vice president, who'd been quietly horrified by Vivica's actions but too intimidated to speak up, agreed to step down as well. A temporary committee was formed. I was asked to join. I declined. I've had enough HOA politics to last a lifetime. But I'll help you audit every last file she touched. And I did. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa and I helped the new committee sort through years of records. We found fines that were never authorized, checks that had been lost, but later deposited into a personal account linked to Vivica's niece, and at least 3 cases where liens had been threatened illegally. Charges multiplied. Vivica was hit with fraud, identity theft, falsification of documents, and misuse of funds. The county DA took the case. At her arraignment, she wore a pale blue suit and tried to look composed, but her voice shook when the judge read out the charges. Her attorney tried to argue it was all a misunderstanding, a clerical error. Didn't work. Vivica was denied bail due to the extent of the evidence and risk of witness tampering. Her trial date was set for the following month. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked me what I thought of the situation. I said, she thought she could run a neighborhood like a dictatorship, but even small power comes with big consequences. Then I walked home to a hot meal and a working stove. Justice, it turns out, tastes even better than pasta. 2 weeks after the arrest, I received a thick manila envelope from the county clerk's office. Inside was a summons to testify and a list of charges that had expanded significantly. I scanned the paper, eyebrows lifting at each new item. Unauthorized surveillance installation, falsifying community budget reports, misappropriation of reserve funds, and a big one, wire fraud tied to a fake contractor scheme. Vanessa met me at the courthouse steps the next day, a stack of folders in one arm and a black coffee in the other. They traced over $70,000 from HOA dues into a side account, she said, handing me a copy of the financial report. She created a shell landscaping company and billed the HOA for monthly services that were never performed. Let me guess. The owner of that company doesn't exist. She does. Vivica's cousin lives out in Arizona. They split the money. Any lingering notion that this had been about petty control evaporated. This wasn't just a power trip, it was calculated theft. During pretrial hearings, the prosecution unveiled a trove of evidence pulled from Vivica's personal laptop, seized during a warrant search. It turned out she'd been keeping meticulous records, not as a form of accountability, but to track which residents were compliant and which were problematic. I was proud to be featured at the top of the second list. Vanessa leaned over during the hearing and whispered. She really saw herself as a queen, didn't she? Even had a spreadsheet titled Loyalty Index. I sat through witness prep that afternoon. The deputy district attorney, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Marissa Lynn, asked about the forged utility request. Did you ever receive a written warning about the shutoff? None. I only found out when the burner went cold. She nodded. And when you confronted the liaison? He admitted he never read what he signed. Said Vivica handed him the papers assuming it was cleared. Marissa jotted that down and flipped to the next sheet. You've also provided affidavits from over a dozen residents detailing similar abuses. We'll be calling 3 of them to testify. One of them was Roy, the retired Navy mechanic. I ran into him outside the vending machines later that day. Never thought I'd end up taking down a pastel warlord, he said, cracking open a can of root beer. But here we are. She picked the wrong community to strong arm, I said. Turns out people don't like being lied to and stolen from, Roy chuckled. You should have seen her face when the sheriff pulled up, like someone told her brunch was canceled forever. The trial began the following week. Courtroom seats filled quickly with residents, reporters, and a few curious lawyers likely sniffing out a civil suit opportunity. Vivica sat at the defense table, her hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing a blazer that looked like it cost more than most people's mortgage payments. Her attorney, a stiff man with a voice like wet cardboard, tried to argue procedural errors and overreach. It didn't go well. Marissa opened with the utility tampering. The defendant used a forged authorization form to have a resident's gas shut off. This was not an oversight. It was retaliation over a fee that had already been paid. The resident did not consent, nor was he notified. This is a clear violation of the law. She followed with excerpts from Vivica's own emails, including one where she referred to me as a persistent irritant who needs to be reminded who governs this neighborhood. Then came the financial charges. Marissa projected images of invoices from the fake landscaping company. Each one bore the same signature, always dated the same day of the month despite no corresponding service logs or receipts. The address traced back to a strip mall mailbox in Phoenix. The prosecution's forensic accountant testified that over 4 years, nearly $250,000 in community funds had been siphoned into the shell company. Most of it was masked by minor adjustments to the quarterly budget summaries rounding up here, delaying a project there. The room was silent except for the clack of a reporter's laptop keys. When I took the stand, I kept it simple. She used her position to punish people who didn't agree with her. When that wasn't enough, she started stealing. And when she got caught, she acted like we were the ones in the wrong. The defense tried to rattle me. Would you say you had a personal grudge against my client? Nope, I said. I didn't even think about her until the gas went out. They didn't ask me much after that. The real bombshell came on day 3. Marissa called Dennis as a witness. He looked nervous, collar too tight, hands clasped like he was holding onto a lifeline. She asked, "Did you knowingly sign a forged utility shutdown request?" "No," he said, voice shaking. "I didn't read it." I trusted her. "Did she ever instruct you to sign documents without reviewing them?" "Yes. She said it was routine, that everything had already been approved." "Did you feel pressured to comply?" He hesitated. "She told me I'd be removed from the board if I caused delays." That was enough. The jury watched him closely. He wasn't proud, but he wasn't lying either. The final witness was a forensic tech who had cracked Vivica's private email archive. One thread showed her instructing her cousin to invoice for the hedge project we never scheduled and keep the amounts under $10,000 to avoid audit triggers. The defense didn't even cross-examine her. Closing arguments took less than an hour. Marissa stood, hands behind her back. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, a calculated abuse of trust. Miss Bramble wielded authority like a weapon and used her position to defraud, retaliate, and silence those who questioned her. The evidence is overwhelming. The law was broken. And justice demands accountability. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, the judge remanded Vivica to county custody, citing risk of flight and witness intimidation. She didn't look at anyone as she was let out, just kept her eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance, like she still couldn't believe it was happening. Back at the neighborhood, things changed fast. The new interim board hired an independent auditing firm. Vanessa helped draft a new charter that limited board powers, required open voting on all expenditures, and implemented term limits. Nearly every resident signed off. Roy built a bulletin board out front of the community center and posted updates weekly. Mark, the guy who got fined for trimming hedges, ran for board president and won unopposed. He started each meeting with a joke and ended with coffee and donuts. The gas company, after confirming the forgery, installed a tamper-resistant lockbox over my meter at no charge. They also formalized a new rule. HOA requests would no longer be accepted without verified resident consent. As for Vivica, sentencing day arrived on a rainy Tuesday. I didn't plan to attend, but Vanessa encouraged me to see it through. The judge read the charges again, then issued the sentence. 12 years, with a mandatory minimum of 7 before parole eligibility. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and undergo psychiatric evaluation. Outside the courthouse, the same reporter who'd asked me for a quote weeks earlier approached again. What would you say to other neighborhoods dealing with abusive HOAs? I thought for a second. Power doesn't make people corrupt, it just shows you who they've been all along. Don't wait until your stove goes cold to fight back. She nodded and wrote it down. I walked home under the drizzle, hands in my coat pockets, past trimmed hedges and beige mailboxes. I didn't care about the aesthetics anymore. What mattered was that the fear was gone. The silence was gone. People talked now, helped each other fix porch lights, swapped tools, watched each other's kids. The neighborhood had finally become what it was supposed to be in the first place. A community. The neighborhood didn't quiet down after the verdict. It woke up. 1 week after Vivica was sentenced, I was invited to a gathering at Roy's house. He'd set up folding tables on his driveway, covered them with crockpots and casserole dishes, and lit citronella torches like it was a backyard celebration rather than a community meeting. But that's exactly what it was, a celebration. Not just of Vivica's conviction, but of what came after. Mark stood on a cooler and tapped a spoon against a mason jar. All right, folks, if you haven't tried Leela's chili, you're missing out. And if you came here to talk bylaws, don't worry, we'll get to that after dessert. Everyone laughed. I leaned against the fender of Roy's pickup, a paper plate in hand, and listened as people swapped stories not about fines and threats anymore, but about plans. Mark's wife was organizing a community garden. Roy had volunteered to lead a workshop on repairing fences without needing permits. Someone even offered to repaint the community center mural, which Vivica had ordered painted over because she thought the original design was too expressive. Vanessa showed up halfway through, still in her office clothes, but with her heels swapped for sneakers. "You're becoming a local legend," I said as she grabbed a soda from the cooler. "You're the one who made the initial call," she shot back. "I just gave the fire a little oxygen. Any news on the civil side?" She nodded. The insurance fraud division opened a parallel case. That shell company Vivica funneled money through, it filed claims for storm damage repairs that never happened. The state's fraud unit is getting involved. So this rabbit hole goes deeper. "They always do," she said, sipping her drink. "But she's not getting out of this one." Later, as people packed up chairs and folded tables, Mark motioned me over. He held a clipboard and a worn leather folder. "You've got a sharp head. I know you said you're done with HOA politics, but we're forming a resident advisory panel. No power, just oversight. Name's already been floated." "Whose name?" "Yours." I paused. "I didn't do this for a title. I know, that's why you're the right guy." I didn't answer right away, but I didn't say no either. The next morning I got a knock on my door, not a clipboard. No warning letter, just a manila envelope. It was from the sheriff's office evidence release documentation. They were returning the footage from my security cameras, along with a copy of the utility form Vivica had forged. I signed for it and brought it into the garage, setting it on the workbench. I stared at the form for a while, reading my signature, the one I never wrote. It was perfect down to the loop in the B. That was the part that still got me, the precision, the confidence in her deception. I slid it into a file labeled HOA Resolved and locked it away. Over the following weeks, a quiet correction swept through Cedar Ridge Estates. Signs were replaced, not with new rules, but with clear ones. The kind people could actually follow. The new board published monthly reports, made every financial document available online, and encouraged residents to join open forums. They even hired a mediator to address disputes before they escalated into formal complaints. The biggest change came when the county's district attorney announced a community restitution fund. The money seized from Vivica's fraudulent accounts, well over $200,000, was redistributed to the HOA and earmarked for repairs, community programs, and refunds to residents who had paid illegitimate fines. A check arrived in my mailbox 2 days later. It wasn't much, just under $300, but it came with a handwritten note from the new treasurer. For the stove and everything else, it read, Vivica's trial had exposed more than financial crimes. It turned out several HOA board members had been coerced into silence. 2 of them, both retirees, had resigned quietly when the investigation began. Under pressure, they'd confessed to signing off on budgets without reviewing them, afraid of being publicly humiliated or removed by Vivica. They weren't charged. Marissa had classified them as witnesses and minor victims. But their stories contributed to the final blow: a formal review of HOA legal oversight in the entire county. A state legislator picked up the issue and began drafting a bill that would require HOAs to operate under stricter transparency laws. It was surreal to read about it in the paper. What started with me trying to cook pasta ended with proposed legislation, Vanessa called that afternoon. You see the article? Hard to miss. My name was in the 3rd paragraph. They want you to speak at the county hearing about what happened, about how it started. I let out a breath. I build houses, Vanessa, I don't give speeches. You built something here too, different material, same foundation, I agreed eventually. The hearing was held in the county chamber. Rows of people filled the seats, some from my neighborhood, others from across the county. A panel of officials sat at the front, flanked by microphones and legal aides. I stood behind the podium, hands on the edge, and looked out at the room. I'm not a politician. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a guy who came home one night and couldn't boil water because someone decided rules mattered more than people. And that someone didn't just bend the law, they broke it, repeatedly, while hiding behind a title. But what matters isn't just what happened. It's what we do now to make sure it doesn't happen again. There was no applause, it wasn't that kind of room, but I saw people nodding, writing things down, listening. The bill passed committee a month later. Back in Cedar Ridge, the changes stuck. The community garden bloomed faster than expected. Kids painted murals on the walls of the community center. One of them showed a house with roots growing into the ground, strong and tangled. Someone taped a note under it. We belong here. I finally said yes to Mark's advisory panel. Not because I wanted authority, but because I'd seen what happened when no one paid attention. One evening, I walked past the gas meter box and paused. The lock was still in place, the camera still angled just right, but I didn't check the feed anymore. I didn't need to. Roy was out front watering his lawn. He raised a hand. Glad you didn't move out, he said. Be a shame if decent people started leaving just when we fixed the place. I stayed because of people like you, I said. He gave a short nod and went back to watering. Later that night, I sat on the porch watching the sun fall behind the trees. The air was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes from fear, but the kind that comes after a storm has passed and everything's still standing. Vivica would serve her time. The HOA would serve the community. And I would serve as a reminder that the balance of power only stays balanced when people are willing to push back when it tips. I turned off the porch light, stepped inside, and lit the stove. The burner flared to life.